Before we jump straight into that powerful moment where Michael dedicated a song to the boy, we need to understand something very important. This wasn't just some random act of kindness that came out of nowhere. Michael Jackson had a reputation for deeply connecting with people, especially children and fans who were going through tough times. If you followed his career even a little, you know he wasn't just about performing songs and doing dance moves. His entire mission went way beyond entertainment. Michael believed music had the power to heal, and he lived by that idea. For example, think about his Heal the World Foundation. This wasn't some PR stunt, it was a real organization he founded in the early 90s, focused on improving the lives of children around the world, funding medical supplies, and even paying for surgeries for kids who couldn't afford them. And that wasn't just a one-off. Michael quietly visited hospitals in nearly every city he toured. He would show up, spend time with sick children, sometimes even pay for their treatment, and often dedicate parts of his concerts to them. So when we hear about him pausing in the middle of a show to dedicate a song to a sick boy, it makes perfect sense. It's exactly the kind of thing he would do. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Most performers have this invisible wall between them and the audience. You know, they're on stage, you're in the seats, and there's a clear separation. But Michael never performed that way. He fed off the energy of his fans, he studied the crowd, looked people in the eyes, and responded to their emotions. And because of that, people always felt like he wasn't just singing at them, but with them. That bond made moments like this one incredibly powerful. To give you a clearer picture, at one of his concerts in Romania, Michael visited orphanages earlier in the day, meeting kids who had been abandoned and forgotten. Later that night, during the show, you could feel that energy carry onto the stage. It wasn't just another stop on the tour. And it's not just fans saying this, even journalists who weren't necessarily Michael fans admitted that his concerts often felt more like spiritual experiences than regular shows. So when we think about this sick boy sitting in the crowd that night, it wasn't just luck that Michael noticed him. It was almost inevitable. Michael was hyper-aware of his fans, especially kids. He often said children represented innocence and hope, and he made it his mission to give them moments of joy, especially if they were going through pain. And if you look at the set lists of his tours, you'll notice he strategically included songs like Heal the World and Will You Be There, both centered on themes of love, healing, and support. That's why when Michael paused the concert for this boy, it wasn't out of character at all, it was who he was. A man who, despite being the biggest pop star in the world, was willing to stop everything just to make one person feel seen, valued, and loved. And that context is crucial, because it sets the stage for what happened next. This wasn't just another celebrity moment, it was the culmination of Michael's entire philosophy about music, love, and humanity, all condensed into one unforgettable night. Now that we understand Michael's history of compassion and how much he cared about kids, let's zoom in on this specific boy, because this is where the story really takes shape. Picture the scene, a stadium packed with tens of thousands of screaming fans, lights flashing, the ground literally shaking from the sound of people stomping their feet and clapping in rhythm. In the middle of all that chaos, sitting near the front rows, was a boy who had been fighting for his life. This wasn't just any fan. This boy was sick, very sick. His parents, knowing how much Michael meant to him, worked tirelessly just to get him to this concert. For them, it wasn't about giving him a fun night out, it was about giving him a memory that would last forever, no matter what the doctors had said about his condition. And if you've ever seen stories of terminally ill kids being granted wishes through organizations like Make-A-Wish, you know how much these moments mean. They aren't just about entertainment, they're about hope. Now, you might be wondering, how did Michael even notice him? Well, here's the thing. Michael had an almost unbelievable way of connecting with his audience. He didn't just stare out at the crowd in general, he actually scanned faces, locked eyes, and picked up on emotions. People who attended his shows often said it felt like Michael saw them personally, even in a sea of thousands. So when his eyes landed on this boy, sitting quietly with his parents, probably weaker than the others around him, it wasn't just a coincidence. And the boy stood out for another reason too. Unlike the rest of the audience, who were dancing, screaming, and waving their arms, he couldn't do all of that. His body just wouldn't let him. But what he did have was this pure, radiant expression on his face. Imagine being sick, but finally seeing your idol right there, just a few feet away. The boy's eyes lit up in a way that's hard to describe. Even in the middle of a roaring crowd, Michael spotted that glow. This reminds me of a story from one of Michael's other concerts where he noticed a fan fainting in the crowd, and instead of just continuing the show, he stopped everything until security got them help. That's who he was. He didn't overlook people, he zoomed in. And in this case, it wasn't just about safety, it was about connection. From what people recall, the boy's condition was severe, but the family kept the details private. Whether it was cancer, or rare genetic disease, or something else, what mattered most wasn't the diagnosis, it was the fact that this child's biggest dream was to see Michael perform. And here's the beautiful irony, he didn't just get to see the concert, he became part of it. So now we've got the stage set. Michael's in the middle of this massive show, 60,000 fans losing their minds, and yet his attention zeroes in on this one boy who wasn't just another face in the crowd. And in the next moment, Michael would do something that would transform this night forever, not just for the boy and his family, but for every single person in that stadium. Alright, so here we are, the moment that would take this concert from being just another tour stop to becoming something unforgettable. The stage is alive, bright lights, roaring music, and Michael in full command of the crowd. But then, suddenly, everything changes. Michael does something almost no superstar would dare to do in the middle of a stadium show, he stops. The music fades, the band holds their instruments, and 60,000 people, who were just screaming seconds ago, are left wondering what's going on. And then, with his soft but commanding voice, Michael directs his attention toward the boy. He doesn't need a microphone trick or some over-the-top speech, he simply acknowledges him. Witnesses say he said something along the lines of, "This one's for you." Just 5 simple words, but in that instant, they carried the weight of the world. And when Michael said them, he wasn't just talking to the boy, he was pulling everyone in the audience into that exact moment. Then the first chords begin to play. It's Heal the World. And if you know anything about Michael's discography, you know this wasn't a random pick. Heal the World was his anthem for children, for compassion, for creating a better tomorrow. The lyrics themselves are a prayer for healing and love. For Michael to choose that song, in that moment, was like handing the boy a gift wrapped in music. Imagine what that must have felt like for the boy. Here's someone whose body may have been failing him, who might have been spending more time in hospital beds than playgrounds, suddenly having the most famous entertainer on earth pause everything to sing directly for him. That's not just special, that's life-changing. And the atmosphere? It flipped completely. You know how at big concerts, there's usually this non-stop chaos, fans screaming so loud you can barely hear the performer? Well, not this time. When Michael pointed to that boy and began singing, the noise dropped. People stood still. Some started crying. The stadium that had been vibrating with sound seconds ago was now united in silence and awe. That's not something you can fake, that's the kind of moment that lives in people's bones forever. And Michael wasn't just singing the words, he felt them. Watch any video of him performing Heal the World and you'll notice he pours his soul into it. But on that night, you could see a difference. His eyes weren't just scanning the crowd anymore, they kept going back to the boy. Every lyric seemed directed right at him, like Michael was trying to say, "You matter. You're not invisible. This is your night." That's the thing about Michael. For all the fame, all the controversies, and all the spotlight on him, he had this uncanny ability to shrink a massive stadium into something intimate. He could make one kid feel like the entire show was just for him, and honestly, in that moment, it was. So while the band played, while the lights danced, and while 60,000 people stood breathless, Michael gave that boy something no doctor, no treatment, no medicine could offer, a memory of being seen, loved, and celebrated by the king of pop himself. And as powerful as that was for the boy, it also shook everyone else in the audience, because they realized they weren't just watching a concert, they were witnessing humanity in its purest form. Here's the part that gives me chills every time I think about it. Normally, at a Michael Jackson concert, the energy is pure chaos, in the best way possible. Fans scream so loud you can't hear the person next to you, people faint from excitement, and the energy bounces around like a storm. But that night, when Michael dedicated Heal the World to the boy, the atmosphere completely shifted. It was like someone had flipped a switch and transformed 60,000 people from a wild crowd into a single, silent witness of something sacred. You could feel it in the air. The roaring screams died down, replaced by this heavy, almost reverent quiet. People stopped dancing, stopped waving their arms, and instead just stood still. Some covered their mouths, others held on to whoever was next to them, and many, and I mean many, started to cry. Think about that for a second, thousands of people, strangers to each other, united in silence because of one boy and one song. That's not something you see at concerts, ever. And when the tears started flowing, it wasn't just out of sadness for the boy's situation. It was because Michael managed to hold up a mirror to the entire crowd, reminding them of their own humanity. In that stadium, people weren't thinking about ticket prices, merchandise, or what hit song might be coming next. They were thinking about love, compassion, and the fragility of life. Some fans later said that, in that moment, it felt less like a pop concert and more like a prayer meeting. That's the level of emotional intensity we're talking about. Now, I want you to picture this from the boy's perspective. He's sitting there, surrounded by tens of thousands of strangers, but suddenly all 60,000 of them are focused on him. They're not cheering because Michael hit a high note or nailed a dance move, they're cheering because his story, his life, is being honored. Imagine being so young, so sick, and yet, for one night, you become the heart of a stadium. That's the kind of thing that stays with people forever. And for Michael? This wasn't a stunt. You could see it in his body language, in the way he lingered on the boy with his eyes, in the way his voice seemed to carry extra weight during that performance. It was raw, it was unfiltered, and it was real. That authenticity is exactly why the crowd responded the way they did. Fans can smell when something's forced, but this wasn't. It was Michael being Michael, the compassionate human being behind the superstar. Even years later, people who were at that show still talk about the goosebumps they felt. They describe the silence, the tears, the collective gasp when Michael pointed at the boy. One fan put it perfectly, it felt like time stopped. We weren't 60,000 people anymore, we were one voice, one heart, all beating in the same rhythm. That's the power of a shared experience, it locks itself into your memory, and you can never shake it. So while the performance of Heal the World was breathtaking on its own, it was the crowd's reaction that turned it into something legendary. Michael may have been singing to one boy, but in reality, he was singing to everyone in that stadium. And judging by the reaction, 60,000 people walked away forever changed, carrying with them the memory of a night where music and humanity collided in the most powerful way possible. Now here's the thing, on the surface, this whole story could just sound like a beautiful concert moment. A superstar notices a fan, dedicates a song, the crowd cries, and everyone goes home with a memory. But if we stop there, we'd be missing the bigger picture. This moment mattered on a much deeper level, not just for the boy and his family, but for everyone in that stadium, and honestly, for what it says about Michael's entire philosophy as an artist. First, let's talk about Michael himself. For him, music wasn't just about rhythm, melody, or entertainment. He often described music as medicine, as something that could literally heal broken spirits. That wasn't just poetic talk, science actually backs it up. Studies have shown that music therapy can reduce pain, lower stress, and even improve recovery outcomes for patients dealing with serious illnesses. In hospitals around the world, doctors use music to calm anxiety before surgeries, to ease the pain of treatments, and to help children cope with long-term conditions. So when Michael sang "Heal the World" directly to that boy, he wasn't just performing. In a way, he was giving him real, tangible comfort. It was therapy wrapped in melody. Second, there's the symbolic side. Michael often talked about children as the purest symbols of innocence and hope. To him, protecting and uplifting them was almost like a mission. That's why so many of his songs, "Heal the World," "Will You Be There," "Childhood," were written from a place of empathy for kids who suffered. By dedicating a song to that one boy in front of 60,000 people, Michael wasn't just singing to him, he was reminding the world to look after the most vulnerable among us. It was a public declaration of values, done not with a speech or a lecture, but through music. And then there's the collective effect it had on the crowd. Think about how rare it is to get tens of thousands of people to feel the same emotion at the exact same time. That's powerful. In psychology, this is sometimes called collective effervescence, a state where a group of people share the same emotional high, creating a deep sense of unity and belonging. It usually happens at religious gatherings, protests, or spiritual events. But here, in that stadium, it happened during a pop concert, and Michael was the catalyst. It also mattered because it broke down the invisible wall between celebrity and fan. We often think of megastars as untouchable, living in a different universe than the rest of us. But in that moment, Michael reminded everyone that at the core, he was human, and he cared. That's what stuck with people. Not the moonwalk, not the glittering glove, but the humanity behind the superstar. So why does this moment matter? Because it proved that music can do more than entertain. It can heal, it can unite, and it can remind us of what truly matters: compassion, love, and the courage to see someone who might otherwise be overlooked. Michael could have easily kept the show rolling, hit the notes, and walked off stage like any other night. But instead, he chose to pause, to acknowledge one boy's struggle, and in doing so, he showed 60,000 people, and now millions of us retelling the story, that kindness can echo louder than any song ever could. Here's the part people always want to know: what happened to the boy after that unforgettable night? Did his health improve? Did he get the miracle so many were hoping for? Or was this moment one of his final joys in life? The truth is, not every detail is crystal clear, and maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Some stories are meant to remain partly private, held closely by the families who live them. But what we do know gives us a glimpse into how powerful this moment truly was. From those who were there, the boy's family was overwhelmed by Michael's gesture. Imagine being a parent, carrying the weight of your child's illness every single day, and then seeing the biggest superstar in the world pause an entire concert just to shine a spotlight on your son. That's not the kind of thing you can put into words. For them, it wasn't just about fame or a song, it was about seeing their child honored, celebrated, and embraced in front of thousands. For once, the illness didn't define him. In that stadium, he wasn't the sick kid. He was the kid who Michael Jackson dedicated a song to. Some reports suggest that Michael actually met the boy backstage after the show. And if you know Michael's history, that's very believable. He often went out of his way to spend time with sick fans privately, giving them gifts, autographs, and in many cases, financial support for medical treatments. Even if details about this specific boy's later life are hard to track down, we know Michael's pattern. He didn't stop caring when the spotlight moved on. He followed up quietly, away from cameras. Now, as for the boy's health, most accounts hint that he sadly didn't have much time left. Whether it was cancer or another life-threatening condition, his journey was nearing its end. But here's where the beauty comes in. For him, those final months weren't just about hospital visits and treatments. He carried with him the memory of being seen, valued, and loved by his hero, and by 60,000 strangers who, for one night, shared his story. That kind of memory doesn't erase pain, but it gives strength. And for his family, it gave them something priceless to hold on to long after. And let's be honest, Not every detail needs to be written down for us to understand the impact. Sometimes, the absence of a clear ending adds to the weight of the story. We don't need a headline or a news article to tell us what that moment meant. You could see it in the crowd's faces. You could feel it in Michael's voice. You could hear it in the silence of 60,000 people holding their breath. What we do know for sure is this: that boy's story didn't end when the concert did. It lived on in every fan who was there, in every retelling of the night, and in the way it still inspires people decades later. Because let's face it, most concerts are forgotten the moment you walk out of the stadium. But not this one. This one became a piece of living history, and the boy became part of Michael Jackson's legacy forever. So while the details of his later life may remain private, maybe the real legacy isn't in what happened afterward, it's in what happened that night. A night where music gave a sick child a moment of immortality, and reminded the rest of us that compassion is the most powerful performance of all.